right, good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to this public forum with the candidates for Burleigh County Sheriff. I am Anessa Pfeiffer Gonzalez with the League of Women Voters, and I will be your moderator. This candidate forum has been organized by the League of Women Voters of Bismarck-Mandan and Dakota Media Access. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that promotes the informed participation of all citizens in their government. The League does not endorse or oppose candidates or political parties. There are two candidates for election in the Burleigh County Sheriff, and both candidates have joined us here tonight. They are Nolan Canwright and Kelly Lieben. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
The audience here tonight, September 27th, is invited to submit questions on the index cards provided, and viewers and listeners may phone in or text in questions for the candidates. The number to call is 701-355-1312, or you can text to the number 22333, text LWV 18527. It is on your screen. This is intended to be a respectful exchange of ideas. Our purpose this evening is to provide voters with information about the candidates and their positions on issues that affect the people of Burleigh County. Now, let's meet our candidates. You each have 1 minute to tell us why you are seeking election to Burleigh County Sheriff. You go first, Mr. Nolan Canwright.
Thank you, Anessa. Thank you, League of Women Voters. Thanks, everybody, for being here and who's watching it at home. Thanks to my opponent. Can you imagine an election if there was only one choice? It would be pretty boring, and it would be very unfair to our citizens. My name is Nolan Canwright. I am seeking the office of Burleigh County Sheriff. I have a family of 4 children. My wife is Tara. And one of the biggest reasons I am seeking election is because it's important that my children get to grow up in an environment just like I got to grow up in that was safe and crime-free. That's what everybody wants, is a safe and crime-free environment. Now, we're going to hear a lot tonight. We're going to hear about accomplishments. We're going to hear a lot about our training, a lot about our education. You're going to hear a lot about different visions that we both want. But at the end of the day, there's nothing more important to me than a safe and crime-free environment for my family, for my neighbors, for our schools and our businesses. And that's why I'm running for sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Canwright. Mr. Lieben, you have 1 minute to tell us why you are seeking election to the Burleigh County Sheriff's.
I'm running for sheriff because I've got the experience, education, and insight to effectively lead our agency. Having served in the Army and at the Burleigh County Sheriff's Department for 28 years, my leadership experience has prepared me to take this next step. I've served 22 years in leadership positions in both the military and law enforcement, and I've attended some of the best leadership training in the military and in law enforcement, such as the FBI National Academy. As your sheriff of Burleigh County, keeping our citizens and our communities safe will be my top priority. I will work hard to make sure that we're addressing the problems facing our county. In closing, I have the experience, education, and insight to effectively lead our agency on day one, and I look forward to that opportunity. Thank you, and please remember to vote Lieben for sheriff on November 6th.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to the questions developed by members of the League of Women Voters, our in-house audience, and the viewers at home. For our audience here to submit a question, please use the index cards provided. Viewers may submit questions tonight, September 27th, by phone at 701-355-1312 or by texting LWV 18527 to the number 22333. Candidates have not been given previous questions in advance, and each candidate will have 60 seconds to respond to each question. Please comply with our time restrictions so we can get to as many questions as possible tonight. Our timer here will let you know when you're down to 30 seconds, then 10 seconds, and then please respect the stop. Okay, again, we will begin with the questions that were prepared by the League of Women Voters or the in-house audience. We'll start with number 1. What issues do you foresee in the near future that will affect officer safety? Mr. Canwright.
Well, there's many things that affect officer safety. Today, there's no surprise that our officers are under attack, not just up here. There's been an increase in shootings in North Dakota, including locally, but it's nationwide. We live in a different world. It's a dangerous world out there. So things affecting officer safety right now, we have a huge addiction problems right in our community. whether it's alcohol, whether it's narcotic. We have an opioid crisis. And most of our officers, a lot of the times, we are dealing with a certain percentage of the population that is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And that becomes very dangerous for our officers responding to a call where you don't know what's at the residence, you don't know what you're going to encounter. I myself was involved in an officer-involved shooting, which was an ambush. I didn't know what I was going to expect around the corner. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous world. And my hat's off to our men and women of law enforcement who go out there every day, and they do a fine job in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Lieben, same question. What issues do you foresee in the near future that will affect officer safety?
I think crime in general out on the streets, for 28 years, we've been fighting some of the same fights. And some of those fights are changing. But I'm going to go a little bit different direction. I think one of the officer safety issues we're going to face is our current radio system. We've been working several legislative sessions to try and get a new radio system for the state of North Dakota. Unfortunately, that funding hasn't been there, but we're continuing to work, and the programs are getting better and better, or I should say the process is getting better and better. When I served as the president of the North Dakota Peace Officer Association, we were able to get the 13th seat on the SIAC committee, which is the statewide interoperability committee for the radio system. I felt that was important because that was the deciding vote on how to move forward with the radio system.
Thank you. The second question I'll ask will go to you first then, Mr. Lieben. If recreational marijuana is legalized, what impact do you see to law enforcement?
If that passes this next election, I think we're going to face a lot of different challenges in the state of North Dakota. We got to be prepared to move forward. We've been fighting the war on marijuana for a while, and so we're going to have to change our tactics, because once marijuana becomes legal, we're not going to be able to use some of our same tactics that we used before. I think the biggest impact that we're going to see at the Sheriff's Department is we currently have 3 canines trained in narcotics detection, meaning those dogs are imprinted to smell the odor of marijuana. Once that law changes, those dogs, even though they're still serviceable, we're going to have to make a decision with our state's attorney on how we can employ those dogs. And I believe that's going to be a big expense as we move forward to fight other drugs.
Thank you. Mr. Canright, if recreational marijuana is legalized, what impact do you see in law enforcement?
Sure. We already have a problem with marijuana. It's a challenge that law enforcement has faced since I've entered law enforcement myself. It's always been there. Now, this will grow, and this will be a different challenge. Now, if the voters of the state pass Measure 3, it's something that we have to adapt to and move forward, and it'll bring some new challenges. With the canines, I was canine handler for 5 years myself. Dogs are trained on a scent, and once they're trained on that scent, you can't just untrain them. So that is going to be a unique challenge on what we're going to do with our narcotic detection dogs. But there's many other issues where it's going to create challenges. If you're over 18, what do you do if you're over 18 now and you have marijuana in your vehicle, or if you have marijuana at school functions? There's going to be a lot of issues that we need to address. But again, that's going to be up to the voters of the state. When it does or it doesn't pass, we will move forward with the challenges and we will adapt to the changes.
All right, thank you. Next question starts with you. Sometimes change is necessary for success. Can you explain new programs or changes that you plan to implement as sheriff?
You bet. I had a unique opportunity at the Bismarck Police Department. The city of Bismarck was very good to me. And one thing I would like to implement is more crime prevention efforts through Burleigh County, not just a citywide approach, but a countywide approach. And when you get your community involved in prevention, if we could eliminate crimes of opportunity, we allow ourselves more time on patrol to respond to other calls and to interact with our community. And when you interact with your community, that's when you learn a lot of things. That's when you learn there's something out of the ordinary going on at such and such residence or at this place at certain times of the night. So I went to Minnesota and trained with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension through crime prevention. And a lot of people don't understand the importance, but in law enforcement, you need a partnership with your community. You can't do it on your own. Without a strong partnership with the community, it is very difficult to combat crime. So again, that would be one of the areas that I would like to see more countywide as our crime prevention approach.
Thank you. Mr. Lieben, sometimes change is necessary. Can you explain how any programs or changes you will implement as sheriff?
Yes, I feel I've always been a change agent in our sheriff's department, always coming up with ideas how we can do things better. And specifically, my last 8 years as the chief deputy, my job was to work daily with the sheriff on programs we have and how we can do better. As sheriff, and as I've thought about my run for sheriff and areas that I think we can keep working on, I'm going to come out with 2 initiatives. The first one is a parcel interdiction program where our drug war has changed and we're no longer fighting it on the highways and the interstate system. What I want to do is build a partnership with all the local law enforcement agencies that have canines, partner with our federal partners, and I want to get into the post offices and the parcel package places because a lot of the drugs and money are being sent through the mail. The other program is the RIO program. It's my rural outreach and enforcement program to benefit the small cities.
Thank you. You started touching on it, so I will continue on that thread. What solutions can be implemented in Burleigh County to combat opioid abuse?
Well, and I think the opioid problem, understanding where it came from, we've got a lot of people that ended up inadvertently addicted to opioids through pain management. I think we have to fight this problem 2 ways. We have to first go after the people that are addicted and get them help. Because if we don't ever cut off the supply of addiction, we're not ever going to eliminate the people out there trying to sell the product. But the other part of that is the program I just touched on, that parcel interdiction. Right now, the drug dealers, like everybody else, they change their business methods based on how law enforcement is doing their job. And what they've seen is their money be taken away on the interstate system as law enforcement across the nation interdicts that money. I want to get into the postal systems with a joint law enforcement team and do random inspections or random sniffs on those packages and take their money.
Thank you. Mr. Canright.
Well, the opioid problem really started blowing up, and it started in the late 90s when pharmaceutical agencies started really pushing pain management. Now, what we're seeing today is people addicted to opioids, usually that started on prescription, are moving to cheaper methods, and that's when you're starting to see heroin. Now, parcel interdiction is great. I've been doing that. I did it many, many times when I was in K-9 at the police department. There's one carrier that is very proactive in parcel interdiction, and there's another carrier that is not as proactive. It's a lot more difficult. But in order to do a full circle here and combat the opioid problem, it's not just going to be an interdiction. It's not just going to be programs when people are released from custody. It's going to be everybody's involvement. It goes back to my crime prevention. It is a community problem here. It's going to come down to doctors, educators, training, and law enforcement working together and really going after that problem. It's something that's not going to be fixed overnight, but there's challenges, and I think we could actually make a dent in it, but it's going to take everybody's involvement.
Thank you. The Sheriff's Department's operating budget is $6.5 million, and the Detention Center operating budget is $8.6 million. What budget administration experience do you bring to the position that would...
Sure. When I left shortly before leaving the Bismarck Police Department, I obtained my master's in business administration, and I had an offer to go work for an energy company during the height of the oil boom. With my background and with my master's in business administration, I was actually moved into an operations manager position where we began and developed a program that nobody else in this country is running that deters theft and combats theft in the energy sector. Now, with that, I manage a budget every day. I have to manage a budget that, in our budget, whether we travel out of state, whether we're looking at tires, it's similar to law enforcement. You have to plan for fuel, tires, training, equipment. There's a lot of expenses. So everybody in this room budgets every day. It's a dollar figure. You add a zero to it. And when you look at a budget and you're part of a budgeting committee, it's not just one person making the decisions. A lot of information comes to you, and based on that information, you have to figure out what you're going to cut and what's more important. So a lot of budgeting is actually managing, but a lot of it's a numbers game, and that's where having a master's really helps.
Thank you. Mr. Lieben, Sheriff, okay.
Okay. I've served on several organizations outside of law enforcement, such as the Missouri Slope Shrine Circus, where I was responsible as the chairman for that budget and the administering of it. I also served as the chairman of the trustees at McCabe Church and was responsible for that budget at the church. But more importantly, I've served under Sheriff Heinert as a chief deputy and worked every year on budgeting specifically for the division I worked in, but also more importantly, as we grew in the agency, I began to take on more of the budgeting responsibilities. This last year, I developed the budget for Sheriff Heinert's approval for the Burleigh County Sheriff's Department. We operate off of a line item budget, which means we have several different categories that we put money into, and the goal is to not exceed the entire budget, but also to operate within each line item so that we don't go over.
Thank you. Do you have any experience in hiring, terminating, or conducting internal investigations?
Yes, I do. My role as both a lieutenant, where I served for 7 years, and now 8 years as a chief deputy, those areas fall directly in line with the duties of those two positions. I've conducted many internal investigations, and I've also made recommendations on those internal recommendations to the sheriff and our management team at the department on what the final outcome of that should be. The hiring process, I've sat on numerous promotion boards and also initial hiring, where I've worked with the candidates as they've come in and presented themselves to us. Ultimately, the hiring and firing falls to the position of sheriff, but he relies on his leadership team to give him advice and direction for him to make his decision.
Thank you. Same question. Do you have any experience in hiring, terminating, or conducting internal investigations?
I've also sat on many hiring boards at the Bismarck Police Department, and depending on the level of the internal, some of those internal investigations were handled by a lieutenant in internal investigations, and others were handled at the shift level, either by a patrol sergeant or a patrol lieutenant. So I've had to do investigations at those levels. Now, in the private sector, I am in charge of all of my hiring and firing with my partner on our energy sector. Now, just lately, we did have to let someone go, and it became, we had to do an investigation on what happened out there, and this person was let go. So internal investigations are performed not only in law enforcement or in government agencies, but they're also performed in the private industry as well. And hiring and firing, nobody wants to fire somebody, but sometimes if you have a bad underperforming employee and you have documentation is the biggest thing, then you have to let go of these people. And that's why the hiring process is so valuable and so important in today's law enforcement world.
Thank you. Please tell us about any experiences you have talking with the legislature on behalf of law enforcement.
Well, many years ago, I was actually a lobbyist for our FOP here, and I got to know some of our local legislators here, and that is quite an experience up there. Now, they didn't lobby for any big bills, but I got to learn the process. So a couple years ago, I ran for city commission, and I got to meet and learn a little bit more about our legislative process. So I know many of our local legislators. I understand how the legislative process works, and I would have no problem speaking in front of a crowd to push forward and back bills that are pro-law enforcement, the stuff that we need. So one thing as sheriff is you're an executive. You enforce laws, but you still need to push for laws that are going to help your community to fight and deter crime. So with that being said, I am very comfortable approaching any one of our legislators in our area or in the state for that matter to push for good legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Lieben.
I've served, like I stated earlier, as the president of the North Dakota Peace Officer Association. We hire a lobbyist to lobby on behalf of all law enforcement in the state of North Dakota. My year as president was a legislative session, and I sat every meeting with our legislative committee and watched the work of our legislative committee and helped provide information where I felt our membership was at as we took a position on bills in North Dakota. I also have served in the last 2 sessions as the representative for the North Dakota Sheriffs and Deputies Association to that law enforcement legislative committee. We've worked every session on the bills that affect law enforcement and worked extensively and intensely on making sure that these bills would be good for North Dakota law enforcement and the North Dakota citizens.
Thank you. What do you propose to reduce the burden of the detention center on county property taxes?
I think, like we mentioned or was mentioned earlier, when you look at that budget is about $8.5 million. One of the things with that budget is we've got some, what we call in county government and the budgeting as offsetting income, ways that money comes in that does not, even though it's spent, money comes back into the county general fund. So really, you don't have a total amount of money spent because some of that is income. Currently, when we look at the budget of 2016 for the detention center and what we were spending for Burleigh County, and we compare that to what we spent last year, there's not an increase of dollars, even though we've moved to that new detention center. It's very close on what's been spent. I think as sheriff, you always have to be looking and say, how do we reduce the burden on taxpayers? Because we got to be as efficient and effective as we can.
Thank you. Same question.
Well, you obviously have a responsibility to your taxpayers, and it's not cheap to house inmates. And there's different pricing, whether Bismarck PD pays a price for Burleigh County or if the U.S. Marshals or Fargo's come in there, there's different prices for these inmates. A big thing to reduce cost for our taxpayers is to do everything we can with programs such as the FI program that was started over in Cass County, which is starting to take off here, but you want to reduce inmates from coming back. Now, if someone breaks the law, they go to jail, they go to the Burleigh County Jail for at least a year, we need to do everything we can to help them with their addiction problems. Again, as I said earlier, many people going to jail have substance abuse problems, but you also have to help other people out with other issues. A lot of people leaving jail, they don't have credit to get homes. They've been burglarizing things, and you have to find them some type of work. There's many programs out there. There's a great program coordinator right now at Burleigh County, and there's people in place to help with these programs to prevent these people from coming back and being a burden on our taxpayers.
Thank you. That leads to the next question. Are there any programs you would promote specifically to reduce jail populations?
Sure. Well, the F5 program is a newer program, and that is helping lots of people out there. Now, a lot of the community doesn't realize how many programs are actually at the jail and how much coordination efforts there are to find people jobs, to help with addiction, and to get them back in so they're valuable assets in our community. And that's half the battle in law enforcement, and that's where the jail has a tremendous staff. And they're doing everything they can because the last time they don't want to see repeat customers come into the facility. So what I would do is get with people already running these programs, find out what we could do better. We could always do better. What's working effectively, what's not working effectively, and brainstorm. What are their ideas? Can we move a little bit in a different direction? Can we take stuff from the FPI program that was started out in Cass and start implementing different measures? But you always have to look forward and find different innovative measures so we don't have return customers.
Thank you. And are there any programs that you would promote to reduce jail populations?
Over the last several years, we've created some positions and started some programs that I think are doing a very good job in reducing that inmate population. We've got 2 people working, like my opponent stated. One of the persons is working more with the mental health and the addiction side of the problem and working to direct those people that are affected by that into the services that they need. I think that's crucial because, again, if we don't stop some of those problems, we're not going to shut off the flow of inmates. The other person we have working works more in the life skills area, and that's where we're talking about helping them get jobs, helping them get a GED so they have an education and can go out and apply. But another thing we recently started was a 40% time chaplain in our jail. I'm proud to say we just held the first religious service in our jail, and inmates had the opportunity to come and attend it.
Thank you. Now, what are your expectations of we're changing topics here.
Sure.
What are your expectations of your employees, and what do you think that they would expect of you?
You know, I'm going to start with what they expect from me. And I think they expect a leader that comes to work every day, gives 100%, cares about them, and cares about the mission of the agency. I think they want a leader that's approachable, but at the same time holds people accountable and makes sure that the mission is getting accomplished. In return, what I expect from the employees is I expect employees to come to work every day and give 100%, or the best that they can do. We understand employees have personal issues going on in their life, and we've worked with some of those employees to try and get them back to 100%. But we also understand that some of the employees, they have to make sure that they share the same mission and values that the agency does. Otherwise, we may have to look and say, okay, maybe this isn't working.
Thank you. Same question.
Well, it all starts from the top, treating people fairly and equally. No matter if your employee's been there for 20-something years or if they've been there for 6 months, you have to treat your employees fairly and equally no matter what position they're in. So what I expect of my employees, to come to work and do their job. It's a very simple task. Come to work and do your job well. At large organizations, not everybody's going to be friends, but when they're at work, you expect them to do their job and do it effectively. In that return, you give your employees respect. You have an open door policy. You lead by example. And with that, you get good quality and productive work. As a shift commander, this was great because I got to go and actually lead. And in return, I had a lot of unique, dynamic people that worked for me, but they worked great together. So what I would do is lay out my expectations so everybody knew where I stood day one on the job. And in return, whether people voted for me or didn't, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. As long as they come to work and do their job effectively, that's all you could ask for.
Thank you. Are there any changes that would allow us to better patrol or enforce the law in the rural area?
Well, that's a challenge. I've been out in the rural areas over the last few months, and Burleigh County has a large footprint. It's a little bit different than working in the city. Now, while working out and knocking on doors in the rural area, of course, you're not going to have a squad car at every rural area at all times of the day. It's just not going to happen. And that's why I said earlier, trying to build a community partnership with these rural areas and a prevention program is so critical. So it's a challenge. Right now, if you drive around Bismarck, you see quite a bit of Burleigh County deputies right around city limits. And to their defense, they're out there, they're writing their citation. It's no different than fishing. When you go fishing, you're going to go where the fish are biting. Well, there's a larger amount of vehicle volume right around Bismarck than there is in Wing or out in Sterling. So we need to have a fine balance of where these deputies are. But again, we have to have a partnership with these rural areas.
Thank you.
And this will give me an opportunity and more time to speak about my RIO program that I want to roll out. Historically, Burleigh County had satellite deputies that were out in the rural areas. They actually lived in those communities, but that put a strain on the agency because when you have a deputy that's stationed away from the rest of the agency, sometimes they don't get the training or the camaraderie that the other deputies get to experience within the agency. With that, though, we had a great touch with some of those rural communities, and that's where I want to implement the RIO program, Rural Enforcement Outreach Program. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to team one deputy with every rural community out there. They have city commission meetings, they have fire meetings, ambulance meetings. This deputy will be the liaison so that they have a name they can call and that a face that goes to their meetings so they know who to talk to in the agency.
Thank you. Next question. How does the Sheriff's Department differ from other law enforcement agencies?
You know, the Sheriff's Department is completely different, and if we were going to compare our agency to some other law enforcement agency, it would be the Federal Marshal Service. Most agencies have enforcement, but in a sheriff's department, the enforcement side is just one small part of or one small piece of the puzzle. I'm fortunate. I've worked in every part of our agency, in every division and section, so I understand what it takes to work together to make sure that we effectively serve the citizens of Burleigh County. We have a lot of different sections that make up divisions. Primarily, we're broke down into a jail, and an enforcement division, and then an operations division. These three areas are all independent but have to work together. And unlike most agencies don't have a jail. That's a big part of our agency, and it takes a sheriff that understands all parts of it.
Thank you. How does the Sheriff's Department differ from other law enforcement agencies?
Well, the largest thing is the correctional facility. And since Burleigh County and Morton County merged, I mean, that is quite the building down there. It's a very large facility. Now, there's a lot of other things we're missing here. There's courthouse security. I want to implement some measures too, and I won't say it publicly, but to better increase our courthouse security. So in today's rapidly evolving world, we turn on the news and we have seen incidents lately that are happening at courthouses across this country. So that's something else the sheriff's responsible as well. Another big difference is the civil side of the department. The sheriff's office serves a lot of civil paperwork. A lot of warrants are served. Even though my time at the Bismarck Police Department, we had municipal warrants, Burleigh County handles different type of warrants and different type of civil paperwork that is served on people. So there are differences. There's different divisions, and that's something that we're going to take a look at. And if there's room for improvement, changes will be made.
Thank you. What is your assessment of the Burleigh-Morton County Detention Center?
Well, my assessment of the detention center, right now I know that there is a challenge in finding qualified candidates and retention. And that's not a unique problem to Burleigh County. That's a problem nationwide. When I've spoke to many classes at our universities, when you go and you ask, what do you want to do as a career? They're interested in law enforcement, but then nobody says, I want to work at the jail. They want to work at the FBI. They want to work at the Secret Service. They want to be a canine officer. They want to be on a SWAT team. That's what you hear. So significant challenge right now is recruiting and retention. And it's very difficult. Our men and women at the detention center that work there have a unique challenge. They are in a building all day long, and there are extreme challenges. But with that, I want to do more so people working in the detention center have more opportunity to advance their careers once they put their time in there.
Thank you. What is your assessment of the Burleigh-Morton County Detention Center?
Well, we did a unique thing when we joined forces with Morton County. Both Morton County and Burleigh County had their own independent jail, and we formed together and built one jail for both counties, which creates a unique situation. Currently, Morton County is part owner in the building. Burleigh County completely manages the operations of it and employs the people. We have a lot of people that work in that detention center that I've spoke to, and they're proud to work in the detention center and have no desire to go on to other jobs. But again, we offer them opportunities to come and serve on many of our teams that we currently have, such as the water rescue team and other teams out there. I think as we move forward, we're not very far into this joint jail, and as we move forward, I think we're going to continue to get stronger and stronger.
Thank you. Should the sheriff be the jail administrator? Explain your answer.
You know, I can tell you by state law, the North Dakota state law says the sheriff is the jail administrator. And as I've campaigned for sheriff, I've heard discussion on whether or not Burleigh County Sheriff should hold the jail administrator title. And one of the things I say, and I'm going to steal a term from a representative during the legislative session, and he said this. He said it's better to debate and not decide than decide and not debate. And so as I go into this position of sheriff, my entire time in the department, the sheriff has run the jail. Now we've got a unique situation with two counties, and as we move forward and the election is over and the new sheriff takes office, if there's stakeholders that want to have that meeting, I want to sit down with them as we weigh this out. Current practice is some jails have gone over to an administrator and have reverted back to the sheriff.
Thank you. Should the sheriff be the jail administrator? Explain your answer.
It's a discussion that we're going to have, especially as the population of the jail and the staffing continues to grow. Now, the sheriff can't spend every day, all day at the facility. I know our current sheriff is at the jail weekly, which is great. And it's noticeable by the employees that I've spoken with. Now, a jail administrator would be at that facility all day during the course of their duties. But the sheriff, again, as we discussed here a couple questions ago, has many different duties, including the courthouse security, the civil, and the enforcement side. So it comes down to a discussion that's going to be, again, state law says the sheriff oversees it, but it's going to be a discussion. And a lot of that comes down to, would it be more practical? Would it be more feasible to hire an administrator? Would it be better if there was an administrator for its employees? So that's a discussion. That'd be something that we would have to look into and move forward depending on what the findings were.
I see. Thank you. Changing topics again from our audience. What role do you feel the Sheriff's Department has in traffic safety?
Well, traffic safety is obviously very important up here. And traffic safety, I myself have had a traffic citation before up here. It's a challenge because many of our citations are so, the fee on them is so minimal. So I've made, and we can look at statistics, and it's nothing against my opponent or the county, I've made numerous traffic stops. If we've looked at statistics, I probably have double to triple. But it's sheer volume I've been exposed to by working in the city. So there's a lot more to a traffic citation. There's a lot more you could do. A lot of our traffic stops, that's where we find drugs in a vehicle, warrants in a vehicle, weapons, tools that were used in the commission of a crime. But a lot of the times you could go and you could approach, and just an example, I could approach a family on a Sunday going to church, and we can have an open discussion. Slow it down here, there's kids playing. And that goes back to that community approach that I want to look at. It's about how you present yourself. Traffic safety is important, but we are going to take a look at what our goals should be at the end of the year.
Thank you. What role do you feel the Sheriff's Department has in traffic safety?
I've said since day one of this campaign that keeping the citizens of Burleigh County safe is my top priority. That means safe in their homes, safe in their schools, safe in their workplace, and safe on the roadways of Burleigh County. When we look at the traffic fatalities in the state of North Dakota, we're losing 50% of our fatalities to impaired driving, roughly 60 to 70% for unbelted people in the vehicle, and roughly about 40% for excessive speed. I think the role of the sheriff is enforcement and education. I've taught for several years, 10 years to be exact, for the North Dakota Safety Council in the area of traffic safety. Traffic citations, ultimately we want voluntary compliance, but enforcement and education is necessary to make sure that the people are safe on the roadways of Burleigh County.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, considering the school shootings that have been in the news around the country, the residents of our community are concerned for our school safety. What can the Sheriff's Department do to ensure safety?
The Burleigh County Sheriff's Department has had a school resource officer. Actually, we had two at one point. So we've been very active in the rural schools. One thing we did with our program that I'm very proud of is we focused on education and not enforcement. And what I mean by that is when we had a problem in the rural schools, we would bring in the deputies that are working enforcement to come in and handle that problem. And we focused the SRO on working and educating and building relationships with the students. One of the things that we've done is constantly worked with those schools to make sure we're providing what they need. Ultimately, the school administrators run the school. We're just there to advise and educate and offer the services that we can provide. One of the things I'm proud to say is after the Sandy Hook incident, we sat down with the Burleigh County School Superintendent and all the principals and asked them, are you satisfied with what we're providing? And their answer was yes.
Thank you. Considering school shootings around the country, the residents of our community are concerned for school safety. What can the Sheriff's Department do to ensure safety?
Well, school safety is one of my top priorities, and I've been campaigning on it as I have 4 children in school right now. Now, our rural schools, they bring a unique challenge because, again, the county has a big footprint. Now, currently, Burleigh does have one school resource officer, and she does a great job. But is one deputy adequate when we have universities and rural schools that reside in Burleigh County? I attended the University of Mary, one of our rural schools, and the only time I saw, this was years ago, the only time I saw deputies at the university is if there was a problem. So again, implementing SROs, school resource officers, doing more with the deputies that you already have, what's happening across the river with the North Dakota Highway Patrol and Morton County, is something that I would look into and implement right away. I want more visibility of law enforcement at our rural schools because I will do everything I can to keep our children and our teachers safe.
Thank you. What pluses and minuses have you seen to the implementation of Marcy's Law? And are there any changes or clarifications you would recommend?
Well, Marcy's Law is it's been in the media here quite a bit, and I understand what Marcy's Law is doing, but I also understand some of the confusion that it's created between different counties. I was just speaking to one of our local attorneys about this, and we need some consistency. So if you're in law enforcement in the eastern part of the state, or if you're in law enforcement in the western part of the state, and one of your sworn officers invokes Marcy's Law, let's just say it's an officer-involved shooting. So when that's invoked, when does that name get released? So Marcy's Law, again, I understand where Marcy's Law came from. I understand that the State's Attorneys Association right away was against it. But right now, I think the biggest challenge with Marcy's Law is how consistent we're doing it across the state. I think law enforcement agencies across the state should be on the same page, but I would take my advice from our local state's attorney's office.
Thank you. Same question. What pluses and minuses have you seen to the implementation of Marcy's Law? And are there any changes or clarifications you would recommend?
So Marcy's Law, in a nutshell, is a victim's rights bill. And as the sheriff of Burleigh County, I don't know how I could say I don't agree with Marcy's Law when we're here to give the victims more rights when they've been victimized. The thing with Marcy's Law is just like any other law that's implemented, there's going to be some growing pains that we have to figure out. Marcy's Law was implemented, and like my opponent stated, there was some confusion on how this is going to play out. Ultimately, with any law, what we need is an Attorney General's opinion, or we need a Supreme Court ruling, the North Dakota Supreme Court, to give us the definition of the intent of that law and make sure we're doing it right. I'm proud to say that the Legislative Committee looked at Marcy's Law, and we polled every deputy in our department for problems on implementation. We received no problems, and the committee received very few problems on Marcy's Law.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Candidates, thank you for being here tonight. That was your last question. Now you will have 1 minute to provide a closing statement about yourself or any topic that you wish you could touch on.
Starting with me?
Yes. You
All
begin.
right. I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for giving me a chance to talk directly with the voters of Burleigh County. I want to also thank my family for their love and support they've given me. And I want to thank my committee that's worked hard and diligently to get the Lieben for Sheriff message out to the citizens of Burleigh County. Burleigh County is still a great place to live, but times are changing, and we need a sheriff that can take over on day one and effectively lead our agency as we continue to provide quality law enforcement to the citizens of Burleigh County. I'm proud to say that our department has done a great job. I'm proud to have served and protected the citizens of Burleigh County for the last 28 years, and I look forward to the opportunity to continue to work and lead that agency as the sheriff as we work to provide quality law enforcement to the citizens of Burleigh County. In closing, I've got the experience, education, and insight to effectively lead that agency, and I'll be ready on day one to take over and fight crime in Burleigh County. Thank you, and I appreciate your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Canright, you have a minute.
Thank you, Anessa. Thank you, League of Women Voters, and everybody for being here and everybody that's tuned into this. Now, the lights aren't going to go off in Burleigh County if I'm elected. The law enforcement's still going to be out in the community. There's going to be some changes. There's going to be some accountability changes. People are going to know where I stand, and I'm going to go to fight. I'm going to go to fight for my employees and our community. Okay? I want to make sure that employees aren't leaving Burleigh County to jump to another local agency. It's been a problem here, not just at Burleigh County, but we can't continue to lose good quality people and continually retrain because it's a burden on our taxpayers. So that's something I'm going to do starting day one. Is going to go right to fight for our employees, whether it takes better benefits or better pay, but we want to be able to retain and recruit a better quality candidate so we don't hit people just coming in and leaving, especially leaving because they didn't perform well or they did something criminally. So again, the lights will be on at Burleigh County day one, and I'll be able to lead that agency from day one on the job. Again, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. I also want to thank the Dakota Media Access and the volunteers from the League of Women Voters for organizing this forum. Thank you, too, to the viewers at home and the audience members here tonight for taking the time to care about these candidates and these issues. This program will replay several times on Government Access, Cable Channel 2, and 602 HD, and will be available for online viewing at www.freetv.org in the days leading up to the November 6th election. Before we close this candidate forum, we remind you that you will need a form of identification to vote in North Dakota. You can find identification requirements and additional voting information on the websites or at the offices of your county auditor and the North Dakota Secretary of State. Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.